Where does that leave democratic government? If the work of civil servants is not up to standard, can they now not be told or held accountable? And if so, how does an elected government get its work done? John Lewis, British Land and GSK are all pausing their membership of Britain's biggest lobbying organisation, the CBI, after it sacked its former Director General, Tony Danker, for alleged misconduct. Critics are also questioning how one organisation can champion both the giant corporate as well as the small business. Is it time to replace the CBI? What do Tony Blair and Silvio Berlusconi have in common apart from being former Prime Ministers? Both have now inspired musicals on the West End stage. Berlusconi, the musical, even features the Italian Prime Minister in a duet with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Do sombre world events really lend themselves to musical entertainment? And the man who sat dead at his desk for 2 days without any work colleague noticing, the problem of the fake job and how idleness at work hinders UK productivity. All that and the mystery of the latest literary darling. That's all after the news with Aaron Armstrong.
Thank you, Michael. Good morning, everybody. It is a minute past 11 here. Well, let's get you up to date with the headlines from the GB newsroom. An alert will be heard on smartphones across the UK from 3 o'clock this afternoon. Now, you'll get a message on your home screen along with that sound and vibration for up to 10 seconds. You can simply swipe away to get rid of it. However, drivers are being told to follow normal traffic laws, so not to touch their phones until it's safe. The government is testing the new emergency siren. It's intended to warn people about life-threatening situations like fires or terror attacks or flooding. The Deputy Prime Minister, Oliver Dowden, says it could save people's lives in future.
It's the case that this has been developed with the National Cybersecurity Centre, which forms part of GCHQ. There will be very strict procedures in place for its authorisation, and it will only be used in a situation where your viewers' lives are in danger. I'm determined that there is a very high bar for the usage of this.
Staff at the British Embassy in Sudan will be evacuated as soon as is feasible. It's amid fierce fighting in the country. However, any evacuation, according to a government source, will be limited and focused on civil servants in the capital, Khartoum. Both the United States and France have evacuated their diplomatic staff or are in the process of doing that. Their operations have been suspended as a result of increasing attacks on diplomatic missions. The World Health Organization reported on Friday at least 413 people have been killed and 3,500 people injured in Sudan since the fighting broke out 2 weeks ago.
An intensely volatile situation there. You've got a couple of generals who've fallen out spectacularly, chucking bombs and things around, and so anything could happen at any point. That's part of the problem, is the fact that there's no way of knowing which way this is going to go, and until just a few days ago, no one really knew there was going to be a problem anyway.
Political commentator Peter Spencer there saying the government had no option but to play it safe. Meanwhile, the Home Secretary says it's crucial the government has the power to deport migrants without being blocked by the European Court of Human Rights. In the Sunday Telegraph, Sela Braverman says for Britain to be truly sovereign, it needs to be able to decide who enters our territory. This comes after 10 small boats carrying more than 500 people crossed the English Channel yesterday. Lib Dem leader Sir Ed Davey says the government isn't doing enough to tackle the issue.
The backlog of asylum applications that have not been processed is 160,000. That's the problem, and this does nothing to solve that. Liberal Democrats want this problem solved, but the government is just being in chaos and can't even do the basics right.
Now, tens of thousands of people will be competing in the London Marathon today. They might not have the best conditions. Rain has been forecast. It will be Mo Farah's final London Marathon, and he's admitted there could well be tears after the race. It is set to be the largest ever, with at least 45,000 people due to take part, and £60 million expected to be raised for charity. Good luck to everyone taking part. The Scottish Government spent more than £300,000 on TikTok before banning it because of security concerns. The video sharing app was banned from government phones following a similar decision in the UK, and the Scottish Parliament amid concerns the Chinese government could access sensitive data. Well, the government began spending money on marketing campaigns in 2020. The amount totalled more than £338,000 in just over 3 years. 2 new pictures of Prince Louis have been published as he celebrates his 5th birthday today. He's been photographed being pushed around in a wheelbarrow by his mother. Louis is expected to accompany his siblings in the procession from Westminster Abbey during the King's coronation next month. And the Prince of Wales has congratulated Wrexham Football Club after their promotion back into the Football League after a 15-year absence. The Hollywood actors Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney, who own the club, were amongst the crowd watching the team beat Borehamwood 3-1. Prince William says he's looking forward to a very exciting future, and the side are doing Wales proud. This is GB News. More as it happens. Now it's over to Sunday with Michael Portillo.
Thanks, Aaron. The long-awaited report said that he was unreasonably aggressive and had an intimidating manner. Dominic Raab resigned as Deputy Prime Minister and as Justice Secretary on Friday after an official report into bullying allegations was handed to the Prime Minister. The investigation by Adam Tolley KC, a leading employment barrister, said that Raab had on a number of occasions gone further than appropriate in delivering critical feedback and been insulting about work done by Ministry of Justice officials. Tolley believed that while Raab did not intend to upset or humiliate officials, they found him unreasonably difficult to deal with, as he was sometimes abrasive. Dominic Raab has hit back, finding fault with the process. Some of the complaints were made years after the event, some, it seems, by people who'd not even met Raab. It emerged that a British ambassador had been removed from negotiating with Spain over the Gibraltar issue after Raab believed that he'd gone outside the Cabinet's clear remit, but he kept his job as ambassador. This was one of the cases where Raab was found by Tolley to be at fault. Now, where does that leave Democratic government trying to implement its mandate? GB News, a senior political commentator, Nigel Nelson, is with me in the studio. Hello, Nigel. It's nice to see you. You see, I have found what Raab has written about what went on rather compelling. I've rather come over to Raab's side. My thinking is, firstly, that the cases in which he was found, as it were, guilty were only 2 out of many different complaints. I think some of the instances that we know about gave a minister just cause for exasperation. And I think it's no longer implied that Raab was yelling at civil servants. Certainly this ambassador was humiliated in the sense that he was taken off the negotiations, but, I don't think that constitutes necessarily a wrongdoing. And I do feel that there is, whatever's happened so far, there is now the potential for civil servants to gang up against ministers and bring accusations which can bring down the most senior members of the elected government. And it's evident from the case I just mentioned about the ambassador that, of course, civil servants are not in danger of losing their jobs. What are your reflections on all of that?
Well, I mean, first of all, the point about the report is you have to take it as a whole rather than individual cases. An awful lot of the cases don't go into specifics because Adam Tolley was worried about breaching confidentiality and privacy. So we don't know, in fact, the actual detail of what Dominic Raab did. What you get overall is that while being professional, being firm is perfectly reasonable, this strayed over into bullying using the definition that Adam Tolley did. And when you read the report all the way through, you get this feeling that that is exactly what Dominic Raab did. I don't think Dominic Raab would have survived in private industry had he behaved like that. There are now so many HR policies in place where bullying is treated with complete zero tolerance that, given the evidence that came out in the report, he would have been fired from any job he was doing elsewhere.
But as Camilla mentioned on her show a moment ago, Gordon Brown was accused of much worse things. I think they involved throwing mobile telephones around. So are you simply saying that Raab has been unlucky or Gordon Brown was lucky, or are you saying that things have changed so much since Gordon Brown was in office up to 2010?
I think things have changed. I mean, Gordon Brown did get away with having huge temper tantrums, throwing stuff around, but then I've known politicians over the years who've done the same thing. Neil Kinnock often lost his temper. So, I mean, I think that there's been a change. The difference here is that you had formal complaints. Bear in mind, nobody in Number 10 made a formal complaint about Nokias being thrown at the wall or whatever. So in the situation here, what you had was formal complaints made about Dominic Raab in 3 different departments. Now, those complaints, 2 of those complaints then get upheld. I wouldn't say he was exonerated for the other ones either. I think it more falls into non-proven. And when you mentioned about the fact that that you have civil servants ganging up on ministers and therefore there's the chance of getting rid of them, those particular things which were done by committee were thrown out of consideration from the report anyway. But when you get a proper formal complaint that can be investigated and that is found to be a case of bullying, then I think there's no question but the Secretary of State has to go.
Yes, I mean, when one of the people who may be concerned, I think when I say may be concerned, is an ambassador, and the accusation is that an ambassador was bullied, I mean, I have to sigh a little bit. I mean, we want our ambassadors to be pretty robust. You know, we don't want an ambassador to go in and talk to Vladimir Putin and withstand a tongue lashing. I mean, are these people really at the right level of toughness if they are so offended by a minister getting cross when the minister thinks that the person has gone beyond the remit?
I think there might be a bit of a difference between dealing with your Secretary of State, who is your boss, and dealing with Vladimir Putin, who isn't. So I don't think it's the robustness of the ambassador. It is a question of the way that he was being treated by Dominic Raab. And in a situation like that, I'm not saying that somebody can't be fired. I'm not saying that you can't be curious about what they're doing, to be inquisitive, to make sure people are doing their job. All those things here, and I think that you're right that the ambassador in this case failed to do what he should have done. It's a question of your approach, and if you start being intimidating, if you make your staff fearful, you are not going to get the best out of them, and that makes you a bad boss.
I'm going to bring in Tom Harwood, our political editor, who's in his hometown of Cambridge. Hello, Tom, are you there? Tom,
I am indeed.
I've been wondering a little bit about the process. I mean, first of all, is it self-evident that an employment lawyer is the right person to decide a case? I mean, this is not a classic employment situation. Officials are not employed by ministers. They work beneath ministers. Also, are there not inbuilt inequalities here? We know the identity of the Deputy Prime Minister, Dominic Raab, as he was. But of course, we don't, except through leaks, know the identities of the people who are making the accusations. I mean, do you get the impression that this is a fair process, or that the process that was applied was the appropriate one?
Well, this is clearly a very distinct process from what goes on in ordinary employment tribunals. Number one, of course, most of these, in fact, every single one of these complaints fell outside of the normal 3-month complaint window that you'd expect in the private sector. A lot of these were historic complaints that were then brought forward. And yes, of course, the relationship between ministers and civil servants is different than the relationship between an ordinary sort of boss and employee situation. However, amongst all of this, what we must say is that it was actually Dominic Raab himself who called for this independent investigation into his conduct, in the hope, of course, that it would clear his name. It must also be said that in the vast majority of counts, it did clear his name. It was only 2 of the many, many complaints that were brought forward that were upheld. And I suppose it is a matter of subjectivity to what extent his behaviour could be determined to be bullying. Of course, Adam Tolley clearly came down on a view that some of the way that he spoke to people in meetings could have been determined to be intimidating. Of course, Dominic Raab contests that. But yes, I think it is absolutely right to highlight the differences between what has gone on here with this 5-month investigation and what would take place in a private sector business.
Tom, one way or another, do you think we are headed for civil service reform? Interestingly, today, Francis Maude, now Lord Maude, former cabinet minister, He's investigating the future of the civil service, and he's talking about making changes. And it strikes me that although at the moment, the Conservatives are in the target range on this, Labour would also be very interested in reforming the civil service if it felt that its policy changes were in any way going to be obstructed by recalcitrant civil servants.
Yes, it's interesting. I was talking to a Labour MP earlier in the week who said just that the civil service does have this bias, and he was concerned that indeed a future Labour government might be imperilled in any reform that it wanted to make. I suppose there is always this concern at the top of government. No doubt you will have experienced it as a minister. Of course, Margaret Thatcher was famous for saying that Yes Minister or Yes Prime Minister was her favourite television programme, speaking about how the civil service can in some way be obstructive. And I suppose there is also this idea that there is a status quo bias very often with regard to the civil service. Any big radical reforming change may well be resisted beyond what is appropriate. However, of course, we've also seen those who've tried to reform the civil service in the past and how much resistance they have experienced. The most notable recent example, of course, being Dominic Cummings, who really wanted to shake up the way in which the civil service worked and bring in many of his own people. Outsiders and misfits was the call that he made. That didn't really go exactly according to plan. And of course, bringing in many outside experts got a lot of criticism in the media as well. So I think there should be a note of caution here for any government that does try big sweeping reforms.
Tom, would you continue to stand in the street in Cambridge for a moment longer? I want to come back to you on another matter. But Nigel Nelson, on this point about whether we're at an important moment, do you think that reform will come out of this?
Well, I think that reform should be looked at, which is obviously what Francis Maude has been asked to do by Boris Johnson, to produce a report on that. Labour have been looking at it. Gordon Brown came up with a commission on the future of the UK, which took in some of these issues. One of the things being considered would be whether or not you should put a civil servant relationship with ministers on a statutory footing, which I think would be a good idea. It would give then both a clear idea of the responsibility of both. Francis Maude, interestingly, talks about having an external audit of a civil servant's performance. That seems to me a bad thing, on the basis that it should be Parliament that audits civil servants, and they do through select committees. They can call civil servants in. And the idea of ministers appointing civil servants or having a say in their appointment would take away the impartiality.
Actually, Nigel, I will discuss this, you and I, more, I hope, one day. I think you're underestimating how much people think that Britain simply doesn't work at the moment. But I want to go back to Tom standing in the street there in Cambridge. There's some news about my old broadcasting colleague, Diane Abbott, MP. What is it, Tom?
Yes, there's the most extraordinary letter that Diane Abbott has written in The Observer, talking about how the racism that Jewish people experienced could not perhaps be described as racism. She compared the racism that Jewish people experienced to the prejudice that, for example, ginger people experienced. The most extraordinary sort of comparisons that were heartily disavowed by many, many people online. And it must be said that in the last hour or so, Diane Abbott has now herself released a statement saying that she wholeheartedly disavows her own comments pretty peculiarly, saying that this resulted from an error with regard to a draft being sent in to The Observer in error. Now, I don't quite understand how this excuse, for that's what it is, really stacks up, because the entire point of her entire piece, from headline down to the last sentence, was about white people not experiencing racism. It was refuting a point that another writer in The Observer had made earlier, or in The Guardian had made earlier in the week. And it does seem like it's a pretty peculiar sort of about turn, an almost half apology, but saying she didn't mean to say what she said. I think some questions are still raised over this incident. And it's pretty telling that we haven't heard from the leadership of the Labour Party about these comments, about comparing anti-Jewish racism to making fun of ginger people. It seems like it's a bit of a trivialisation of a very serious issue.
Thank you very much, Tom. Diane Abbott still making headlines. And many thanks indeed to Nigel Nelson here in the studio. You are watching Sunday with Michael Portillo on GB News, Britain's news channel. Coming up, what next for the CBI? Is it time to rethink the UK's largest lobbying group after dozens of companies cancel or pause their membership following allegations of sexual misconduct at the organisation? Can it continue to champion business? That's after the break.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Saturday nights on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
Saturday nights on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. John Lewis, GSK and British Land are among dozens of companies which have decided to pause or cancel their membership of the CBI after the organisation was rocked by allegations of sexual misconduct. The organisation is now suspending key activities until June, while allegations of rape are investigated. The CBI says it's to carry out a root and branch review of its culture. Separately, the CBI's Director General, Tony Danker, has been fired for alleged misconduct. Mr Danker denies all the allegations. The City of London Police launched an investigation following Mr Danker's sacking and the suspension of 3 others. For nearly 60 years, the CBI has been a strong link between the government and business, representing nearly 200,000 organisations and 7 million employees. It lobbies the government on regulation and policies that keep British business both working and competitive. Apart from the allegations, the former editor-in-chief of the Wall Street Journal, Patience Wheatcroft, says the CBI's time has passed and it's no longer fit for purpose. She says it's increasingly difficult for the business lobby group to represent big companies like Amazon and small and medium-sized enterprises. So Andy Mayer is the Chief Operating Officer at the Institute of Economic Affairs, and Sir Vince Cable is, of course, the former leader of the Liberal Democrats, and he served in Cabinet as Business Secretary. Andy, welcome to GB News. You must have had a lot of contact with the CBI. Did anything in your experience with the CBI prepare you for the series of scandals in which it's now embroiled?
Well, it's very regrettable. I mean, I've been dealing with the CBI on and off and previously from being public affairs head in major corporations for about 15 to 20 years. And most of the work of the CBI is not this high-profile headline stuff we're seeing at the moment, but it's very low-level, detailed regulatory affairs work, where they're looking at the entire business operating environment and trying to find areas of common ground between businesses where regulations are causing difficulties, such as blocking innovation or discouraging investment and growth. And those areas of the business are mundane and unremarkable. And it's the side of the business which is more social, which is trying to bring people together in settings which maybe a lot of alcohol is involved, where behaviour has not necessarily been put under proper controls, and they've not dealt with that properly. And that's the scandal they're now facing, not just the incidents themselves, but their failure to deal with them properly.
When I was in government, Andy, I worried that government got its feed from business through a very limited number of sources, which might not be properly representative. And more recently, I would have been concerned, were I still a minister, that the CBI had taken very strong political stands. Obviously, it was in favour of Remain. It was also against Scottish independence. Do you think it's done itself favours by taking clear political positions?
Well, those positions will have come, as you say, from a handful of sources, usually at the most senior level on their highest level committees. And in the case of Scottish independence, they clearly messed up because they alienated large swathes of Scottish business. In the case of the Brexit debate, they were a little bit more nuanced, but not much. But the dominant view of many of the corporations who pay most of the fees to the CBI was that Remain should win. And they decided to take a stronger stance. In the company I was in, we took a different stance, which was to keep the chief executives out of it and let people work out these things themselves by letting both campaigns talk to employees directly. And that was actually far more effective for Remain because it let people persuade each other rather than being given a moral lecture by somebody in a senior position. So in that view, the CBI actually took the wrong approach and probably helped the Leave campaign in the way they approached it. But generally, if you're a general business group, you shouldn't be getting involved in controversy. You should stick to the knitting and try and help the general business operating environment.
Sir Vince Cable, did you, as I did, experience any discomfort that you might be, that your sources of information and lobbying from business might be too few and too narrow?
Well, there was sometimes discomfort, but not for that reason. My experience of the CBI, this is the period of Richard Lambert and mainly John Cridland, were very professional, and the CBI gave good technical advice on things like executive pay, women on boards, which I found valuable. But I regularly saw the Institute of Directors, the engineering employers, the Small Business Federation, and I got a wide range of views. I think where Patience Wheatcroft is right is that times have changed. I mean, the very big international companies, the Amazons and Shells and BPs, have no reason to work through the CBI, and there are very effective sectoral bodies for retail, chemicals, the car industry, advanced engineering. They don't need the CBI, and if it's a small company, they're better working through the Federation of Small Business. So the fact that the CBI has always been there doesn't mean it should always continue to be there.
Vince, did you ever have a feeling that they were getting too much into an undergrowth of, diversity, climate change, gender issues, things that, you might reasonably think were pretty secondary to their main task?
Well, no, as I said, in their dealings with me, they were always very practical and dealing with real issues. I mean, you mentioned gender issues. I mean, the one big concern we had when I was in government, and I was leading this, was to try to get more diversity on the boards of big companies, and particularly women. We set an objective of 30% and indeed achieved it. And the CBI was supportive, and as indeed other business leaders were. And that seemed to be an entirely proper intervention. And it was driven not politically, but by a sense of what is good business.
Let me ask Andy on that point. Did they get into a sort of woke undergrowth, do you think?
Oh, definitely. I mean, the thing to understand about the CBI to staff level is it's a very shrewd recruiting ground for people who otherwise would be working for political parties or in other campaign groups. So we did once describe it as being the NUS for adults, because there was quite a degree of overlap between these people who would otherwise have been working as SPADs for a Labour government, who had been shut out of that opportunity for a decade. And often you will get people bringing those agendas with them and not necessarily asking the right questions or having the understanding of business at a detailed level where those political priorities were not necessarily appropriate. So we could see that in the reaction of most of corporate Britain, corporate America, and organisations like the CBI to the Black Lives Matter protests. The instant reaction was not, are they making a good point, but how is it relevant to business? It was, we must do as much as possible to see that we're on side, which has caused an enormous number of problems with inappropriate training and diversity, equity, inclusion being imposed, some of which is not actually helpful towards the goals of being anti-discrimination. So there, CBI and others have been asleep on the job. And the same was true with Brexit. The approach was just not thinking through that the other side might win, and therefore would they be ready to actually give a new Brexit-led government good advice in the same way they've been given the previous one.
Let me just change the subject for a moment with Sir Vince Cable. A quick reaction, a quick one, please, Vince, to the Raab civil servant crisis.
Well, I thought Nigel Nelson summarised the arguments very well. This was, there clearly was bullying. As he also said, as you said, standards have changed. I mean, 20 years ago, the behaviour in government, in business, in schools, in the armed forces would have been very different. And what we now regard as bullying would have been regarded as normal. But Raab has clearly failed to understand the way that modern organisations function. And there's, if it had just been one or two complaints, I would be inclined to support your view that we've got a few rather oversensitive individuals. But there were large numbers. Tolly's report only went into several of them. And it seems to me he's failed. He's been arrogant, and his response rather reinforces that and has paid the price for it. What I sincerely hope is that we don't get, as a reaction to this, a sort of lurch into politicisation of the civil service. I was a Secretary of State in very difficult conditions, having to make large cuts in staff. The civil service were very loyal, politically impartial. I wouldn't want that to be fundamentally undermined by a revenge for Dominic Raab.
Thank you very much. If politicians are going to be held to account for being arrogant, there may be quite a clear-out coming. Many thanks to Sir Vince Cable and to Andy Mayer. Nearly every smartphone in the United Kingdom will be sent a siren blast, and it will vibrate at 3 o'clock this afternoon as a test of the government's new emergency system. The test had originally been planned for the early evening, but was moved to avoid clashing with an FA Cup semi-final. The alert system is designed to be used to warn of extreme weather events or during terror emergencies or if the United Kingdom were under attack. Our siren voice on this subject is national reporter Paul Hawkins.
Last year's Storm Eunice. It battered Wales, the west of England, and this guy.
Tom, I can tell you, in the last few minutes, it has strengthened so significantly that if I just show you, up over here, we were standing up there just now, we couldn't stand up. We were literally getting blown around.
Rare but extreme weather like this, including fires and floods, are why the government says we need an emergency alert system.
Well, this is another tool in the toolkit in order to help the government respond to emergencies and help protect people's lives. And it's very similar to what we have in Japan, United States and elsewhere.
At 3 p.m. today, you'll get something like this on your phone, a test for the new alert system. It'll also have a loud siren-like sound or vibration lasting for about 10 seconds. In Tonga, during last year's tsunami, this is how their emergency alert system sounded. In fact, quite a few countries have an emergency alert system, including Australia, Canada, and Italy. Now it's the UK's turn.
We won't get any information about people's personal phones. This is a broadcast signal that goes to every mobile phone. The government doesn't find out anything about your phone.
As long as your phone has a 4G or 5G signal, and if it's an iPhone running iOS software 14.5, or for Android phones, Android 11 software or later, you'll get the text and the noise even if it's on silent.
If you're living with an abusive partner, this could put you at risk.
For survivors of domestic violence, however, who rely on secret phones, charities like Refuge have produced this video explaining how to turn off the alert.
These alerts will make a noise even if that phone's on silent, so we really want all survivors to know they've got a phone and the discovery of that phone would put them at risk. They can turn off these alerts.
The AA have also recommended drivers turn off the alert if they're behind the wheel at 3 p.m. But for the rest of us, the government recommends setting your phone to receive the alerts, which, it says, many of us may not receive for months or even years.
So these are extreme weather conditions. There is a danger to life, and only idiotic reporters are going to be out in this kind of weather.
Paul Hawkins, GB News.
Thank you, Paul Hawkins, for that noisy report. And a reminder, the National Emergency Test is scheduled for 3 o'clock this afternoon. For 40 years, the Greek and British governments have been negotiating, or some would say arguing, over the collection of stone sculptures and inscriptions known as the Elgin Marbles or the Parthenon sculptures. The British ambassador to the Ottoman Empire, Lord Elgin, took them from the Parthenon in Athens between 1801 and 1805 and sold them to the British Museum, where they have resided ever since. Under a new plan by former Chancellor of the Exchequer George Osborne, who now chairs the trustees at the British Museum, these sculptures are on the brink of being returned to Greece to be displayed in the new Acropolis Museum. But the sticking point is one of ownership. Under British law, they would legally still be owned by the United Kingdom. This, says the Greek government, is unacceptable since the marbles were, for some Greeks at least, stolen by Lord Elgin in the first place. Yanis Varoufakis is an economist and former Greek Minister of Finance, and earlier today he spoke to me from his home in Athens, and I asked him whether he believes that the sculptures should be returned to Athens and displayed in the Acropolis Museum.
Yes, I do think that that should happen in the interests of both the Acropolis Museum and the British Museum. I am not a cultural nationalist. I care about the British Museum and its capacity to project global culture to the four corners of the earth, just as much as I care about the Acropolis Museum. But the Acropolis Museum is the place where to display the Parthenon marbles and statues, which have been so violently removed by Elgin, while at the same time, we Greeks must make sure that the particular room in the British Museum exhibits a permanently rotating collection of antiquities that allow the British Museum to be a world leader in projecting and communicating the concepts, notions and ideas that came out of ancient Greece.
Is the question of ownership important to you, Yanis? Does it matter whether they belong to Britain or to Greece? Is this not a subject that we could skate over, on which we could compromise?
Absolutely. I don't care about ownership, but I do care about the integrity. You see, Michael, if this was just a statue that was pulled out of some shipwreck or dug out by an archaeologist, or a vase, they could have stayed in the British Museum. The problem with the Parthenon marbles was that Elgin actually removed them, defaced them. Remember Lord Byron's poem in 1812, where he said, "Dull is the eye that will not weep to see," addressing the Parthenon. "Thy walls defaced, thy mouldering shrines removed." We need to reintegrate the Parthenon marbles with the Parthenon. It doesn't matter who they belong to. They belong to humanity. They don't belong to the Greeks, to the Brits, to the Europeans, to the Asians. They belong to world culture. And at the same time, make sure that the British Museum remains a center of attention of anybody who wants an idea of the classics.
Describe to us, Yanis, the Acropolis Museum, because a new museum has been built in Athens. I must say I'm deeply impressed by it. It's almost a shadow of the Parthenon itself. So you can move up inside the building. It's largely glass. You can get up to the altitude of the pediment and of the frieze where the sculptures are meant to be and look across to the Parthenon and relate where they should be on the Parthenon to where they could be in the Acropolis Museum. Quite an interesting concept.
It is an architectural marvel. On top of the museum, which is sitting just below the hill of the Acropolis, they've built effectively a glass rectangle, which is of exactly the same proportions and the same size of the Parthenon, and it is in parallel to the Parthenon. And the space in which the Parthenon marbles, the ones we still have here in Greece, are displayed, and the space that has been reserved for the marbles that are in the British Museum would, if placed in that spot, would be a fantastic parallelism with the Parthenon. And I think that British visitors would feel very proud if an agreement can be struck between the Greek and the British authorities that will allow the reunification of the Parthenon marbles with the Parthenon, while at the same time, I insist on this, the British Museum should be a privileged space for displaying a rotating, beautiful array of Greek classical antiquities.
Now that is a very interesting point. One argument that is made is that the British Museum has about 6 million visitors a year, the Acropolis Museum about 1.5 million. London is a city that is much more visited internationally than Athens. So it seems the exposure of the sculptures, at least, is greater in London than it would be in Athens. What's the retort to that?
Well, the retort to that, Michael, is that this is the reason why I think that the British Museum should remain a centre of excellent displays from the ancient Greek classical era. But the way that, most visitors that go into that particular room in the British Museum today live with a tinge of sadness, including my British friends, because they can see that those marbles don't belong there. They should be reunified with the Parthenon. But imagine if they knew that this deal was struck between our two countries, and what they actually see is a rotating display of splendid ancient Greek antiquities that are voluntarily and happily and gladly sent by the Greek people, by the Greek state, to the British Museum. Then I think we would have the best of all possible worlds. And I think then George Osborne would be able to get a lot more funding in the process of crowdfunding for the sponsorship for rebuilding and refurbishing the British Museum. It will be, mutually advantageous both for the British Museum and the Acropolis Museum.
Personally, I find the present display of the sculptures in the British Museum underwhelming. They're in a long, thin corridor. By comparison with the stunning location where they would be located if they went back to Greece. But putting on your old political hat, Yanis, what do you think is actually going to happen?
Well, I have no idea what's going to happen. What I can tell you is what is happening. There is a very shady, ghastly discussion taking place between George Osborne and the Greek Prime Minister, or the Deputy Prime Minister, a deal that is really worse than what we already have. The deal is to send a quarter or half of the marbles to Greece on condition that the Greeks will send some antiquities to the British Museum as collateral. I mean, this is simply adding insult to injury. I don't think they should be going down that road. It should be a completely different kind of approach. We should look at the British Museum and the Acropolis Museum as one unit that needs to be enhanced. That should mean all of the Parthenon marbles being reunited with the Acropolis Museum, the Acropolis, the Parthenon, and we Greeks should take a very keen interest in ensuring that the British Museum has a magnificent rotating display in that particular hall that you mentioned, which at the moment is sad, I agree with you, but it can be made magnificent.
Yanis, I think they ought to appoint you as a negotiator. You could perhaps smooth the course of these negotiations. Thank you so much for coming on GB News this morning. Yanis Varoufakis. We contacted the British Museum to participate in this programme, but it declined to take part. However, the museum has said that the marbles were not stolen. It says that Lord Elgin acted with the full knowledge and permission of the legal authorities of the day in both Athens and London. Lord Elgin's activities were thoroughly investigated by a Parliamentary Select Committee in 1816 and found to be entirely legal. I spoke to GB News political editor Tom Harwood earlier about Diane Abbott withdrawing her remarks about racism. It's now been reported that she has had the Labour whip withdrawn. We'll be talking to Tom again shortly to find out more. That's after the break.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
Right, folks, that was a spicy one, wasn't it?
With us four, plus a special guest.
Sometimes she has to stick her foot in it. Sometimes she has to say things as they are.
Sometimes I think we should keep the refugees and send the pensioners to Rwanda. Then we'd be in a much better state.
Well, Benjamin, that is...
The Saturday 5. Saturday nights from 8. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. 8 years ago this month, a daring plot was executed to mislead German intelligence about Allied invasion plans in the Mediterranean. The submarine HMS Seraph deposited a dead man off the Spanish coast. He was dressed as a British military intelligence officer. He carried false invasion plans that suggested that the Allies wouldn't attack Sicily. Known as Operation Mincemeat, the deception mission has made a page-turning book, been made into a film, and now into a musical. Arts editor of Express Online, Stefan Kyriazis, joins me now. How amazing. I think it's going to be a musical. Welcome back, by the way.
Thank you.
Is it going to be a success?
Oh, yes. It's already had a couple of trial runs last year and the year before. Huge cult success. This is the transfer to the West End. I went to see a preview. They've got bigger budget. They've got some flashier costumes, but they haven't lost this wonderful, organic, kind of carefree, slightly Edinburgh Fringe student review feel to it. It's selling, and they've just extended for another 6 weeks. So I'm very hopeful. This is one of my favourite shows. And I'm very hopeful that, yes, it will be a success, and it should be a success.
The plot worked magnificently. I mean, the conspiracy plot, not the plot of the musical. The plot worked magnificently. So this body was found by the Spanish authorities. Of course, you know, Spain had a relationship with the Axis power, so eventually the information was transferred to Germany, and Germany seriously believed that we would not be attacking Sicily. Of course, we did attack Sicily, and so we completely wrong-footed them. So I suppose it's because it has, as it were, a happy outcome from our point of view, from the point of view of the forces of good, that just about makes it suitable for a musical. Is that right, do you think?
I think it's rather something like Hamilton, for example. You're taking historical events, you're telling a very important story, you're also giving it a very contemporary, modern commentary as well. So there's a lot in there about the white male patriarchy at Westminster, at the Home Office, the War Office. There are discussions about the use of a homeless man's body with no regard at the time for an actual human being that was just thrown into the sea. So there are serious issues going on in here, but also it's done very deftly, it's done very intelligently, it's done with real heart. Men and women swapping roles the whole time. It's a cast of 5, 4 of whom wrote the show as well. Absolute geniuses, all of them. And it also, very, very importantly, crucially, has a show-stopping number about love, sung by a boy as an old, ageing female spinster, recalling her lost love from the First World War. I can barely speak about it most of the time. It makes you sob, and suddenly the whole story becomes real as well. These are real people, real events, human consequences. It's wonderful. It makes you laugh, it makes you cry, it teaches you something about then and now. Brilliant.
OK, so think about the way in which real-life events find their way onto the stage, and in particular into musicals. Tell me how it is that Silvio Berlusconi has ended up on the stage, and with what success?
This one did not get my vote, shall we say. For me, very limited success. And
pity, a very good friend of mine is involved, but never mind.
Yes, it's a very tricky one, because this time you have a man that has generally now been disgraced to some extent. He still has a huge number of followers, but it's more of a negative view of this person. And so we're looking back over his life. It's very hard to know how to sympathise or engage. What is your involvement with it? And for me, I would rather just it stayed an absolute farce, because there's a huge amount of ridiculousness to his life and his story. He wanted to be a pop star originally. He just kind of blew whichever way the winds went with opportunity. But it also decides it wants to inject serious themes. And for me, they just sit very uneasily. So
are you happier with Tony Blair turning up in a musical?
That one only previewed sort of for a short period last year. That opens next week. It's a very similar setup, older politician looking back on their life. This one is far more directly satirical. Interestingly, both wanted to be pop stars, both somewhat depicted in the musicals as very superficial creatures, just looking for opportunity and falling into politics. But it absolutely goes much harder on the satire. There are songs from Saddam Hussein, Bin Laden. For me, the best moment in Berlusconi was Putin, shirtless, rowing on a lake, singing a love duet with Berlusconi.
Not entirely good taste, perhaps.
Not good taste, but actually amusing, because it was also highlighting that Berlusconi was bewitched and bedazzled and in love, and Putin was rather predatory and using him. But it still had a very, for me, unfortunate throwaway line about deaths in Salisbury, which just, again, spoiled it. Uneasy tone all the time.
Just to let you know, this stuff is not new. I'm about to go and see an opera that was written in 1987 called Nixon in China. Of course, the famous event when Nixon visited China. It seemed impossible that it would happen in 1972. We've just got a moment left. Were you ever in the audience for Dame Edna Everage? I was.
I have not. I have friends who actually have met and interviewed him. Everybody endlessly talks about, I've been talking to them about how warm he was, how he remembered them.
Humphries.
Yes, Barry, and how he was very, very constantly aware, absolutely no fool. I grew up with him on TV, laughing.
I did go to the theatre, and of course I sat there white-knuckled all the time, fearing that I was going to be picked upon, because he had this absolutely brilliant way of picking on members of the audience, humiliating them, but in a very amusing way. And then when you met him privately, I went to a couple of dinner parties with him, this kind of very serious, reserved man who you hardly believed that there was a Dame Edna Everage in there, but Barry Humphries will be greatly missed. Stefan Kyriazis, thank you so much for joining me. You're watching Michael Portillo on GB News, Britain's news channel. In the next hour, for 2 days, the government tax auditor in Finland sat at his desk and no one noticed that he was dead. Are people in jobs that don't need to be done, and would they be missed? That's coming up after the weather.
Hello there, welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office. I'm Jonathan Vautry. A bit of a mixed picture as we move throughout the rest of Sunday, with a mixture of some showery rain, all thanks to low pressure that is sat across the UK, bringing relatively unsettled conditions. Most of us will see relatively light winds throughout today, but we do have the isobars squeezing a bit more across northern areas of Scotland, and that's bringing in some gales, particularly across coastal areas and the Northern Isles. That will make it feel quite cool, and it's bringing in much colder air from the Arctic, so we'll see some snow falling over the Grampians as well. Elsewhere, there will be a good deal amount of cloud around, some showers, longer spells of rain, but some sunshine possible across the very far southeast might allow temperatures to climb towards 16 degrees Celsius, but feeling rather cold elsewhere, particularly if you are exposed to that wind. As we move throughout the night, the outbreaks of rain across the southeast will gradually push their way off, and the showers will fade across England and Wales. We'll see further rain, though, into Northern Ireland, and the showers will continue across northern areas of Scotland, and that sleet and snow could now start falling into lower levels. Amongst some of the clearer spells, a patchy frost is possible across central areas of Scotland. Generally elsewhere, towns and cities around 3 to 5 degrees Celsius. But it will be a cloudy start for Wales and then into southwest England as this rain pushes its way in, and generally the cloud building across the rest of central southern areas of England into the afternoon. Some sunnier spells for the northern half of the UK, still with a scattering of showers, mainly across eastern coastal areas again, where the breeze will be quite strong, so it is going to feel closer to freezing if you are exposed to that wind. Into Monday evening, the showers again will tend to fade their way off the cloud across the southern half of the UK slowly, pushing further south. Underneath some of those clearer intervals that develop into the night, it is going to turn much colder and a more widespread frost is possible, so that is something to be aware of if you do have any tender plants outside. Otherwise, Tuesday looking like one of the better days of the forthcoming week. Bye-bye.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Hello, I'm Calvin Robinson. Do not miss my Common Sense Crusade, Saturdays at 7 p.m. Join me for some in-depth discussions on faith.
Is that not the start of the slippery slope?
It's very much so. And the big moral questions of the day.
I'm baffled.
You've got some nerve.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon and welcome to the second hour of Sunday with Michael Portillo with more good conversation, arts and entertainment. Coming up, what does a director of customer happiness do? What is the role of a brand evangelist? Fake jobs are stifling the UK's productivity. The mystery of Ellie Conway. She's sold the film rights for her debut novel for $200 million and the book isn't even published yet. Why is the identity of the publishing world's hottest new author such a secret? Can silks and wigs be replaced by artificial intelligence? It seems that AI might make better legal decisions. And the taste of Britain, how geography matters when it comes to Welsh leeks and Kentish ale. That's all after the news with Aaron Armstrong.
Good afternoon to you. It's 12:01. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. An alert will be heard on smartphones across the UK from 3 o'clock this afternoon. People will receive a message on their home screen along with that sound and a vibration for up to 10 seconds. The public can simply swipe it away, but drivers are being told to follow normal traffic laws, so don't touch your phone until it is safe to do so. The government testing the new emergency siren intended to warn people about life-threatening situations like fires, flooding or terror attacks. The Deputy Prime Minister, Oliver Dowden, says the sound could save people's lives.
It is the case that this has been developed with the National Cybersecurity Centre, which forms part of GCHQ. There will be very strict procedures in place for its authorisation, and it will only be used in a situation where your viewers' lives are in danger. I'm determined that there is a very high bar for the usage of this.
Diane Abbott has been suspended as a Labour MP pending an investigation for saying Jewish people are not subjected to racism. In a comment article for the Observer newspaper, the former Shadow Health Secretary said Jewish people were subjected to prejudice like Irish or red-headed people, but they did not experience racism. Her comments have been widely criticised on social media, with comedian David Baddiel tweeting, "In the 20th century, 6 million Jews were murdered. Not sure that's prejudice." Ms Abbott has since withdrawn the remarks and apologised for any offence caused. A Labour Party spokesperson condemned the comments as deeply offensive and wrong. The UK is preparing to remove embassy staff from Sudan amid fierce fighting, although planned evacuations by other countries appear to be facing difficulties. The rival military factions battling for control have accused each other of attacking France's convoy, both claiming one French person has been shot. That's unverified, though. Egypt says a member of its mission has been wounded by a gunshot. US Special Forces have evacuated diplomatic staff and their families from the capital, Khartoum. A government source says British embassy staff in Sudan will be evacuated as soon as it's feasible. The Home Secretary says it's crucial the government has the power to deport migrants without being blocked by the European Court of Human Rights. In the Sunday Telegraph, Suella Braverman says for Britain to be truly sovereign, it needs to be able to decide who enters our territory. This comes after 11 small boats carrying nearly 500 people crossed the English Channel yesterday. The Lib Dem leader, Sir Ed Davey, says the government isn't doing enough to tackle the issue.
The backlog of asylum applications that have not been processed is 160,000. That's the problem, and this does nothing to solve that. Liberal Democrats want this problem solved, but the government is just being in chaos and can't even do the basics right.
Well, the London Marathon is underway with tens of thousands of competitors running through the capital. It will be the final marathon for Sir Mo Farah. He's admitted there could be tears after the race. We know the decorated Paralympian David Weir has already finished in the wheelchair category. Today's race set to be the largest ever, with at least 45,000 people taking part and £60 million expected to be raised for charity. The Scottish Government spent more than £300,000 on TikTok before banning it due to security concerns. Their decision followed a similar one by the UK to ban the app from government devices over concerns that sensitive data could be accessed by the Chinese state. China, though, has dismissed those claims. More than £338,000 was spent on marketing campaigns in just over 3 years by the Scottish Government from 2020. 2 new pictures of Prince Louis have been published as he celebrates his 5th birthday today. He's been photographed being pushed around in a wheelbarrow by his mother. Louis is expected to accompany his siblings in the procession from Westminster Abbey during the King's coronation next month. And the Prince of Wales has congratulated Wrexham Football Club for their promotion back into the Football League after a 15-year absence. The Hollywood actors Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney, who own the club, were in the crowd. They watched their team beat Bournemouth 3-1. Prince William says he's looking forward to a very exciting future, and the side are doing Wales proud. More as it happens here on GB News. But for the moment, that's it. It's back to Michael for more.
Welcome back. MP Diane Abbott has been suspended by the Labour Party pending an investigation into comments she made within a letter in the Observer newspaper. The comments referred to the experience of different ethnic groups, their contact with racism, which her party has since described as deeply offensive and wrong. GB News Deputy Political Editor Tom Harwood has the latest for us. Tom, I'm a little bit confused about the chronology here. A moment ago, you were telling us that Diane Abbott had withdrawn her remarks, and yet it seems that subsequently she was suspended from the Labour Party, had the whip withdrawn. What was the sequence of events here?
Yes, that's absolutely right. Firstly, what happened is Diane Abbott submitted a letter to the Observer newspaper saying that she disagreed with a comment in the Guardian newspaper earlier this week, saying that she believed that Jewish people don't experience the same sort of racism that black people do, comparing, for example, the racism that Jewish people experience to the prejudice that ginger people experience, the most extraordinary sort of remarks. After which, of course, there was a furore online, many people pointing out the crass nature of the comment, at which point Diane Abbott issued an apology. She said she withdrew the remarks and that she, in error, had sent in, quote, an initial draft of the letter. However, this was a curious excuse, and let's not beat around the bush here, it is an excuse for that sort of language. I don't think many people found it entirely convincing that an initial draft of a letter that was entirely about how Jewish people, as well as gypsies and other white people, do not experience the same racism as black people, or it could not be described as racism, was the thrust of her argument. And yet, she was claiming that this was somehow sent in error, that this was a draft. The Board of Deputies of British Jews, after that statement, issued a statement of their own saying that they found this excuse entirely unconvincing and called on the Labour Party to withdraw the whip. And around 2 hours after this whole incident began, the Labour Party issued a statement saying that the chief whip of the Labour Party has withdrawn the whip from Diane Abbott. So as we speak, she is not a Labour MP. Clearly, the Labour leadership agreed with the Board of Deputies of British Jews that Diane Abbott's excuse was entirely unconvincing.
Thanks, Tom Harwood. I must say that has clarified the sequence of events, and it turns out that although Diane Abbott withdrew her remarks, the way in which she withdrew them was not convincing, at least for the Labour chief whip. I rather imagine that Sir Keir Starmer may not be too sorry to have had an opportunity to withdraw the whip from Diane Abbott and making the point that he has changed the Labour Party. Improving productivity tops many economists' priorities for economic growth. But productivity has increased annually by only 0.5% for the last 15 years, far less than at the end of the 1990s and the beginning of this century. A recent survey revealed that 89% of employers admit to wasting time with workers busy doing nothing in made-up jobs or dawdling over work that should take just minutes. Idleness may be disguised by work descriptions such as brand evangelist, customer happiness specialist, and director of first impressions. Those are real job titles. Is the workplace full of people doing nothing? Andre Spicer is Executive Dean of the Bayes Business School and joins me now. Andre, is it your feeling that we really do have a productivity problem in Britain? Is it true that people are doing non-jobs and that people are idle in their places of work?
So if we just take the first point, which is about productivity, one of the biggest blights of the UK economy is the fact that our productivity growth is fairly flat. And if we compare it to our competitors, the US, many European countries, Asian countries, their productivity is growing. Now, why is our productivity flat? One part of it is our poor infrastructure. Another part of it is poor quality management. A third part is the fact that many people are doing jobs which they find very difficult to be productive in, or perhaps they escape from pushing the job forward and being particularly productive. Now, one of the reasons for that is that often people are in jobs where they're doing work which they themselves do not think needs to be done. And the worst case is when people are in jobs where they have a huge task to do. It's very important, but they feel like that task is crowded out. So let me just give you one example before I stop. Teachers in the UK, so they work the longest hours amongst teachers in Europe. But if you actually look at the time which they spend face-to-face teaching students, it's actually amongst the shortest. So it suggests that their crucial job, which is teaching children, is getting crowded out by all sorts of other stuff, which might not be particularly meaningful.
Andre, the infrastructure in London, where I live, is pretty good. The commute is not a bad one. Let's go then to the question of management, which you mentioned. And it strikes me that there seems to be poor management in both the private and the public sector. Why are managers not better prepared and better trained in Britain, do you think?
Well, there's a long tradition in Britain of amateurism when it came to management. So the first business schools and management schools were set up in most other countries, developed countries, over 100 years ago. The first business school in the UK was set up, London Business School and Manchester Business School, in the mid-1950s. Sure, we've had a lot of managers being produced during that time, but often being fairly ineffective. So what you tend to find is large firms tend to be pretty productive and have pretty good quality management. It's the small and medium firms which are often left a little bit wanting. You also see the kind of same thing happening in the public sector, where quality of management could certainly be improved. And that's something we as a business school see as important in our mission.
I think you hinted at this a moment ago, but tell us a bit more. Do you think people are wasting their time filling out forms, red tape?
Oh, absolutely. So you see a kind of rise of red tape. So many of your viewers will be familiar with that red tape in the form of sludge. So either in their job, so sludge are kind of things which make the job difficult to do unnecessarily. But the weird thing is that a lot of that sludge is being pushed not just in the company, but off onto consumers. So if you think about, say, cancelling a magazine subscription, often it can take you weeks and weeks to actually do it. And it could be a lot more efficient than it actually is. And the same is true within companies. Often people spend most of their working days dealing with this sludge rather than actually getting their primary task done.
Very interesting. Nudge, sludge and the blob. Thanks to Andre Spicer. Well, instead of a person dressed in robes with a wig on his or her head, in the future a judge might be an artificial intelligence bot. One of the UK's most senior judges predicts that artificial intelligence might replace lawyers and make better decisions. Sir Geoffrey Voss, the senior civil law judge in England and Wales, predicts that the speed of technological advance makes it a real possibility that AI may become more intelligent and more capable than humans. He also believes that automated court decisions are feasible. Andrew Eborn is a broadcaster and futurist and joins me now. Welcome back
thank
to
you,
GBNews.
Michael. Lovely to be here.
It's good to have you. How feasible is this? What sort of decisions can AI make?
Well, first of all, it's incredibly feasible, and already the systems around the world are using this. Both Elon Musk and Stephen Hawking said it's our greatest human achievement, but potentially our biggest existential threat. AI is going to replace virtually every job that it can replace, but it's also going to make it very efficient. And what Sir Geoffrey's saying is actually he's looking at those efficiencies. He's a great advocate for embracing technology. And not everything will be able to be done by AI. Thomson Reuters have said about 9% of the large commercial firms in the UK are already using or looking at using AI to make their systems more efficient. So what it can do, the great advantage is it can analyse large amounts of data, talk about precedents, draft or do initial drafts of documents and so on and so forth. But it's got a few flaws. And some of those flaws are things like hallucinations. So what happens, they call it hallucinations in this glorious world, where it can't get an answer, it makes it up. So if you ask it for a source, it will give you a completely fictitious source. And there's been a couple of cases. Jonathan Turley, for example, is a US law professor, and he was falsely accused of sexual harassment of a student, really serious stuff. And Brian Hoop, an Australian mayor, he was apparently imprisoned for bribery, which he wasn't at all. But the AI bot churned this false information out. So what we need to do is to say, understand the technology, work out where it can create that great efficiency, but also have a few caveats.
But I can't believe that we've devised a technology that goes off on its own and we can't work out where it's made things up. This is implausible to me.
Well, it's really difficult. Like any information that regurgitates, and that's effectively what it's doing, it is dependent on making sure you've got the right sort of filters. So there's a company called Case Tech, which has got this system called Co-Counsel, where the AI bot doesn't know the answer, rather than making something up, it has to alert saying, I don't really know what the answer is. And it's quite interesting. I played around with it and I even asked it today what its own limitations were. And it said, well, it can't obviously do advocacy in court. It can't have the sort of human interaction that a lawyer would have with their clients. And it's rather, I guess, best in analogies like in a criminal case. You would have the jury decides the facts, but the judge decides the law. And I think if you look at it on that sort of basis, it's incredibly powerful for making sure you can cut through all that sort of administrative side. And China, for example, China's Academy of Engineering, they claim that AI, their use of AI, has reduced their workload by about a third. And they claim that between 2019 and 2021, they've saved $45 billion as a result. Well, it's a claim. We can have a look at that sort of side. But certainly think we need to embrace technology. We need to understand what it does. And so many people put their heads in the sand. And my advice to everybody is, look, work out what I do around the world. I talk to people about what capabilities the technology has so that we can embrace it on a sort of sensible level and basically introduce those efficiencies, but also understanding the risks.
Speaking as a non-lawyer, it strikes me that a big difference between Britain and many other systems is that many systems are codified, there are articles, but in Britain we rely a great deal on precedent.
Yes.
So we may be looking back at something that happened in 1692, but more likely 1975 or something. Now here I do see that AI can be pretty useful, and I can see here how it could be suggested that AI is going to be better than a human source. Because even if you're going to your computer screen, let alone if you're looking at great volumes of jurisprudence precedent, AI is going to be able to do it better.
Oh, absolutely. And that's the whole idea. It can analyse massive amount of data in a far more efficient way. It can also prepare initial documents. What it can't do necessarily is the negotiation of the commercial terms and so on and so forth. So what we need to look at, and Sir Geoffrey himself, he pointed out, look, hang on, you would still have to have a right to appeal to a human judge, because there will be errors. And whilst we're looking at that sort of side, we do need to be aware of those risks. But we should embrace the technology, understand what it does, and embrace it in that sort of way.
I'm going to take you up on one point. You said that you couldn't see it being used for advocacy, but I certainly can. I mean, not everyone who appears in court is very brilliant. There are some people who are extremely gifted and some who are not. And I can well imagine that AI could replace some of those people.
Well, it's interesting that you raise that, because there is an example. There's an app called Do Not Pay, which claims to be the first lawyer robot out there. And they tried to do a case where they were going to have somebody with their earpods, and they were going to feed them the lines to say whilst they were there. So it's going to be the first trial using AI and an AI robot, albeit remotely. And they were going to give them the lines, but it was found to be in contempt of court, so it didn't proceed. I think it's interesting when you're cross-examining somebody in the witness box. You can turn around and say, well, hang about, this is inconsistent, you said this a little while ago. It can be a powerful tool. And I think that in the current state is very interesting. What we find is GPT, it passed the bar exams, it's passed medical exams. Version 3 was in the bottom 10%. Version 4, however, was in the top 10%. So it's going to get better and better, and that's the thing we should be aware of.
It all lies ahead of us. It's quite interesting that week after week we come back on this programme to subjects that are related to artificial intelligence. Andrew Ebon, thank you very much indeed. Well, you're watching Sunday with Michael Portillo on GB News, Britain's news channel. Coming up, a $200 million film deal based on a book about a spy that hasn't even been published yet. Just who is the author of this year's most hotly anticipated novel? That's after the break.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
So Dubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Saturday nights on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
Saturday nights on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's the book that everyone is talking about, a James Bond-esque spy with amnesia who's determined to take revenge on his former employer. Apple Original Films reportedly paid $200 million for the rights. Superman star Henry Cavill and Oscar winner Sam Rockwell are set to star. It's available to pre-order and it's sure to shoot to the top of the bestseller list. The book is called Argyle by Ellie Conway. But there is a mystery. The book is not yet published, it hasn't been made available for review, and it seems no one knows who Ellie Conway is. The reclusive Miss Conway does have an Instagram account, but posts are limited. Her UK publisher, Bantam, says only that she lives in the United States and is currently working on the next instalment in the series. Who is Ellie Conway, and why has her debut novel got so much attention? Kathy Lett is a best-selling author, and she joins me now. Kathy, thanks for coming on GB News. First of all, Do you think it is a debut novel, or do you think this is a nom de plume from someone who's written before?
I think it's definitely a nom de plume. I mean, the whole spy, this whole story reeks of mystery and intrigue. I mean, I think it's going to turn out to be J.K. Rowling. I mean, no debut novelist would ever get that kind of huge launch unless there was belief in her capabilities. So we know J.K. Rowling wrote, the Galbraith novels under a pseudonym. I've always wanted to have a pseudonym. I thought my pseudonym could be Sue Denim. How good would that be? So, and it is quite a female premise too. I mean, the premise of the book is a spy with amnesia, a female spy. She has amnesia, and so because she's starting to remember all of her incredible experiences, they trick her into thinking she's a spy novelist so that they can say, oh, it's only fiction. And I always thought if there was going to be a female a Jane Bond, you'd have a character who shoots from the lip with lethal one-liners, because women are more verbally dexterous than men. We use about 350 more words in our daily vocabulary. Well, not you, Michael. Obviously, you have a black belt in Kung Fu, but for most men, they're not as verbally dexterous as women. So I thought a Jane Bond who just could give men lethal bit of quiplash with a wonderful one-liner would be the perfect vehicle for a female spy. So it does feel to me as though it is a female author, but this idea that it's someone called Ellie Conway, who doesn't even really exist, is a myth. But it's an intriguing story. But 200 million, I mean, it's insane. Nobody gets paid that unless they're an established author.
Yeah. You pretty much unpicked the mystery, I think. It's quite funny that apparently there's not even been consistency about how to spell Ellie Conway's name. Now, I'm just wondering, is that publishers' carelessness, or do you think that was a clue to us, that they were trying to intrigue us even more by making a little error like that?
You've got to hope that it was an intelligent mistake, a little breadcrumb for us to follow that trail. But, I mean, those days of the big advances are well and truly over. I mean, I've sold a lot of my books, sold the movie rights. And in the glory days, you could I got like $100,000 a year from Scott Rudin for a movie that he never even made, paid off my house. So there were times when there were big advances, not as big as this, 200 million. But that's changed now. Now there are so many books. And there are so many projects that, generally speaking, you only get a few £1,000s for your rights now. As you probably know, Michael, you've probably sold many of your rights to your books. But so that's also completely on the nose, unless it's someone huge, like maybe it's Stephen King. I mean, I think it's got a female sensibility to the story, but it's got to be some major, major big author. But, the suspense is killing me. Maybe the book doesn't even exist. Maybe it's going to be like just blank prose, literally just blank. We shall see.
Cathy, and let me just change the subject. We've all been shocked and saddened by the death of Barry Humphries, and you knew him very well. You must be very, very, very saddened today.
Oh, I'm actually in pieces. I'm amazed I'm even sitting here without my mascara running. I mean, yes, Barry has been my very good friend since I was a teenager. In fact, well, the very first time I met him, I said, I think you invented me. And he was like, why? And I said, well, you know how Dame Edna has a daughter called Valmay and she's married to Mervyn and they live in a blonde brick veneer in suburbia? My mother's name is Valmay. She's married to Mervyn and they live in a blonde brick house in the suburbs. I said, am I a figment of your imagination? And, then a firm friendship was struck. And we've been neighbours too in London for something like 26 years. In fact, his house just backs directly onto mine. And whenever he gets home from some overseas trip, he would email me saying, Cathy, dear, I'm poised at your rear entrance, or something suitably mischievous and wicked. So, I can see his office from my office window. So we were going to actually get a flying fox so we could zip in and out of each other's gardens at short notice. And I'm sure you knew him, Michael. Did you know him?
I knew him slightly. I had the pleasure to have been a couple of times at dinners where he was present. Yeah. But of course, when he went out to dinner with a group of people, he could be, or he could look as though he was very, very shy. He certainly wasn't leading the conversation. He certainly wasn't in character. The two characters that he portrayed most famously were quite different from him. But you are so lucky. Your life must have been greatly enriched by those memories and by that relationship.
Absolutely. I mean, I thought dinners with him were like the Wimbledon of wit, with one-liners just bouncing back and forth. And, he was someone who could give you quiplash. But you're right about he was many people rolled up into one delicious ball of self-deprecating joy. But he had when he was Dame Edna, of course, he was so caustic. Dame Edna had that ability to sort of elevate and annihilate at the same time. I remember when Michael Bolton was on Dame Edna's show, and Edna said to him, "Oh, you've had so many hits, 9 this year." And Michael Bolton got all puffed up, and then Dame Edna said, "On your website," things like that. So they could give and slap at the same time. And then, of course, there was Edna's cultural attaché, Sir Les, who had that ability to talk about the whole herds of elephants in the room, which was kind of liberating in a way. And, of course, their manager, Barry Humphries, was their antithesis: warm, witty, kind, gentle, self-deprecating, as I said, and also incredibly intellectual. I mean, he was a bibliomaniac. He collected 50,000 tomes on his bookshelves around there, just groaning. He was an art connoisseur. I mean, he had an amazing intellectual hinterland, which enriched his comedy all the time. So I don't think we'll ever see his like again. I mean, I do think he's the greatest comedian since Charlie Chaplin. A lot of people are saying that now, and I think that's true. So, but, Australia has a lot of dangerous creatures. We've got the funnel web spider, we've got the box jellyfish, we've got the tiger shark and the tiger snake, and we had the Dame Edna Everage, because her wit was so poisonous but so hilarious. I mean, he could hospitalise you from hilarity at any time. So profound loss and dearly missed.
What a superb obituary you've just delivered there. And my personal sympathies to you on your loss, Kathy Lett. Coming up, it's no longer just rogue individuals who are trying to get into your bank account. Hacking is now big business. How is the government protecting us against the cyber hackers? That's after the news headlines with Aaron Armstrong.
Good afternoon to you. It's 12:30. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. An alert will be heard on smartphones across the UK from 3 o'clock this afternoon. People will receive a message on their home screen along with a sound and a vibration for up to 10 seconds. The public are being told they can swipe away the message. Drivers, though, are being advised to follow normal traffic laws, so don't touch your smartphone until it's safe. The government is testing the new emergency siren intended to warn people about life-threatening situations like fires, flooding or terror attacks. Diane Abbott's been suspended as a Labour MP pending an investigation for saying Jewish people are not subjected to racism. In a letter for the Observer newspaper, the former Shadow Health Secretary said many types of white people with points of difference, like Irish, Jewish or red-headed people, are subjected to prejudice, but they don't experience racism. And Ms Abbott has since withdrawn the remarks and apologised for any offence caused. A Labour Party spokesperson has condemned the comments as deeply offensive and wrong. The UK is preparing to remove embassy staff from Sudan amid fierce fighting, although planned evacuations by other countries appear to be facing difficulties. The rival military factions battling for control have accused each other of attacking France's convoy, claiming a French person has been shot. Egypt says a member of its mission has been wounded by a gunshot. US Special Forces have evacuated their diplomatic staff and families from the capital, Khartoum. More on those stories as soon as we get it here on GB News. But now it is back to Michael.
Thanks, Aaron Armstrong. The popular view of a hacker is maybe a teenager sitting in a basement wearing his hoodie, determinedly penetrating our bank accounts to steal our money. But hacking is now state-sponsored. Attacks are made against our vital infrastructure. According to the new Deputy Prime Minister, Oliver Dowden, the UK is facing ideologically motivated cyber threats from Russia-aligned groups. The issue of cybersecurity is not new, but as technology increases, the threat is becoming ever greater. Raj Samani is a cybersecurity expert and joins me now. Talking about us, the citizens, the ordinary people, what kind of threats do we face from the sorts of things that I've been talking about, moving from the teenage hacker to this big business attack?
Well, I think, the important thing to recognise is that cybersecurity is not a computer-related impact. It can affect every part of our lives, and we're seeing a growth in, for example, low-level scams. So, for example, people tricking us to try and steal money from our accounts. But even everything that we read and everything that we listen is being influenced by malicious threat actors. And, they can be nation-state sponsored, but also there are organised criminal gangs making tens and hundreds of millions of dollars.
Can they steal our money without us responding to the attack? I mean, is it when we get caught out, we're asked to give information, is that when we're in danger, or can we be in danger without even that happening?
Well, I think the important thing to recognise is most attacks are using some form of social engineering. So they're effectively trying to trick us. They're pretending to be our bank, for example, and those are the most common. And so that's why we kind of recommend people for, simple things such as strong passwords or, if you receive an email, don't click on the link. And those forms of advice are still really applicable today.
I mean, a lot of people are not very computer savvy, and you probably get less computer savvy the older that you get. I mean, I'm very often struck that some of these attacks are ludicrous. The spelling is ridiculously poor. The thing is absolutely implausible. But I do worry that there will come a stage in my life when I won't have the mental defence that I have today. And I suppose a lot of these people, their business model is that they don't have to succeed all that often to make lots of money.
Well, and that's the benefit with cybercrime. I mean, we talk about computer hackers, but effectively these are just criminals. And they can benefit from, for example, automation. So, they can send 100 million attacks or 100 million spam emails and only need to be successful maybe 0.1 or 0.2% of the time. For example, the growth of ransomware, we're seeing huge sums of money being made, but they're carrying out these opportunistic attacks. And so, it is effectively a fairly easy thing. And from a criminal's perspective, it's a free hit because they're not putting themselves in physical harm. You can carry out an attack from your own bedroom halfway around the world. And so that's the challenge that we face with digital crime today is that it can be automated, but also you can be, physically completely disconnected from the victim.
Are there any successes for the forces of law and order? I mean, you refer to these people being very distant, they're in different jurisdictions. Can the police score any hits?
Absolutely. And, for example, the European Cybercrime Centre in The Hague has had huge successes, numbers of takedowns, arresting people behind ransomware. The National Crime Agency, for example, has been spearheading, holding people accountable for carrying out these attacks. And so I would argue that, when it comes to cybercrime, it's not a risk-free crime. People do get caught, and there's a multitude of examples where that happens. And, and even from a nation-state perspective, the US Department of Justice have indictments against those behind the likes of the WannaCry attack in 2016.
Let's talk about ransomware a moment. If a person were kidnapped, the authorities would strongly encourage those who are approached for a ransom not to pay it, because if you pay the ransom, you simply encourage another kidnapping down the line. Now, what's the position on ransomware? Are people paying up?
People are paying, and they're paying in tens of millions of pounds. The challenge, of course, becomes if you're a company whose systems are held hostage or they're threatening to release data, then if you can pay 20, 30, 40 million pounds to be back online, then that seems like quite a cheap thing to do rather than being offline. But we would argue that criminals aren't very honest, and so they may not give you the keys back, or they may not, hold up to their promises. And so we would always argue to organisations, you've got to be proactive. And there are sites and repositories available, such as No More Ransom, which is a global law enforcement and private sector initiative, which provides advice, guidance, reporting, but also free decryption tools. And so we would argue, don't pay the ransom. If you're, obviously you're listening to this now, you've got the opportunity to put your defences in place before you're a victim.
What about a role for the law here? Would it be possible to outlaw the paying of ransoms? I mean, of course, some companies would suffer. They'd be down for a long time. They'd have to repair. It would also encourage them, by the way, to put in better defences. But how is it acceptable that tens of millions of pounds are being paid over to criminals?
Well, and we're seeing this being played out now. So in Australia, for example, the Australian government are talking about outlawing ransomware payments. And then the Australian insurance industry is saying, well, just a second, let's not be so binary about this. And that's the challenge that we face, is that this is an attack on our society. And our advice is always never to pay a ransom, because you're simply fueling the cybercrime economy, you're encouraging more attacks to occur. But let me put it to you this way: if you go to a hospital and you're being turned away from patient care because somebody opened an email, then if you're the patient, you're actively encouraging them to pay and be online as quickly as possible. And so we've got to look at the nuances here. There may be some edge cases where we may have to pay a ransom. I mean, in Ireland, for example, the HSE attack didn't pay the ransom. But the impact to the Irish healthcare system was dramatic. And so these are some of the challenges and some of the discussions I think we need to be having more of.
Mm. Absolutely fascinating. It's brilliant to talk to someone who's so well informed. Such a difficult subject, such a difficult aspect of the modern world. That is Raj Samani. Many thanks. Well, it's more than just a race. People dress up in zany costumes. They raise tens of thousands of pounds for charity. They push themselves harder than ever before in their lives. Some even find the energy to propose during the 26-mile race. The 43rd London Marathon is underway. And amongst the racers are two familiar faces. Friend of this programme and associate political editor at The Telegraph, Christopher Hope, is running for charity World Hope International, and GB News political reporter Olivia Utley is raising money for Macmillan. GB News reporter Lisa Hartle is on the route. Hello, Lisa. Does it feel like the busiest marathon of all time?
Well, where I am right now, everyone's left, so it was up to 48,000 runners taking part this year. I'm at the start line, so the last of those runners left about half an hour ago, I'd say, but it was certainly incredibly busy. So yes, it definitely felt like one of the busiest. As you may have already heard, there's the man who won the elite men's race, Kelvin Kiptum. He came in at 2 hours, 1 minute and 25 seconds. Sifan Hassan, she won the elite women's race, 2 hours, 18 minutes, 33 seconds. And then, of course, Mo Farah, the Olympic gold medalist, he's said that this is going to be his last marathon, and he came in at 2 hours, 10 minutes and 28 seconds.
Mo Farah coming in a pretty good time there for his last race. He said he might be in tears. I don't know whether you happen to know whether he was in tears as he finished.
No, I would love to have seen that incredibly momentous time he's making in history, but I'm still at the start, unfortunately.
So Christopher and Olivia are out there running from GB News, not for GB News, but from GB News. Did you manage to see them as they set off? Well, I suppose you may not have spotted them amongst the 48,000.
Yeah, I tried to, and I spoke to some other runners before they set off, and trying to pick everyone out was impossible because there's just so many people that were racing past us, and obviously some amazing costumes as we always see with this race. My favourite was there was a massive rhino, there was a minion, there was all kinds of amazing costumes, and then Adam the cameraman, he saw a massive avatar. So I mean, this race is incredibly hard anyway, 26.2 miles. Imagine running that anyway, despite then wearing like a huge costume. It must be so hard, and the dedication people must give to this to train for today. And it's of course all to raise money for charity. £60 million is raised during the London Marathon for all these incredible causes.
Although I have an enormous imagination, I cannot imagine running the London Marathon. Many thanks to Lisa Hartle, and very good luck to Christopher and Olivia. You're watching Sunday with Michael Portillo on GB News, Britain's news channel. Coming up, Welsh leeks and Kentish ale. How the United Kingdom is protecting our food and drink heritage. That's after the break.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
Right, folks, that was a spicy one, wasn't it?
With us four, plus a special guest.
Sometimes she has to stick her foot in it. Sometimes she has to say things as they are.
Sometimes I think we should keep the refugees and send the pensioners to Rwanda. Then we'd be in a much better state.
Well, Benjamin, that is...
The Saturday 5. Saturday nights from 8. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Depending on your taste, you may be pleased or appalled to hear that the Belgian customs authorities destroyed over 2,000 cans of Miller High Life beer this week. The company uses the slogan, "the champagne of beers," to promote its product. And the word champagne is protected under law as applying only to beverages produced in the Champagne region. The same protection is granted to Scotch whisky, Stilton cheese and Welsh leeks. Geographical indicators are designed to guarantee the true origin of a product. The product's quality, reputation, or other characteristic must be attributable to the specified area, and at least one of the production steps must take place there. Why are these protections so important? Jason Chester is a senior associate and chartered trademark attorney from the intellectual property firm Marks & Clark, and he joins me now. Welcome to GB News. Why?
Thank you, Michael.
Why are these things important? Let me be provocative and say, are these a restraint on trade? I tend to believe on free trade. Should we be restricting what people can call their product?
I don't think so. I think geographical indicators serve multiple functions. I mean, importantly, they inform consumers that products have certain characteristics and certain qualities. And if we use Scotch whisky as an example, if anyone could call whisky Scotch whisky, irrespective of where it's made and how it's made, the market would be completely saturated with all types of whisky. Some could be of an inferior quality, for example. And ultimately, this could damage the Scotch whisky brand and reduce the attractiveness of it. And result in there being a significant reduction in sales. So I think it's very important.
There used to be European Union legislation on this. Of course, people like French wine producers are very keen on this sort of protection. Has that now passed into UK legislation? And if so, is it any different?
Yeah, so from the 1st of January 2021, at the end of the Brexit transition period, the UK has operated its own GI system. Our GI system is virtually identical to the EU system, and in fact, it's been taken from an EU regulation. So really the main difference is just geographical scope. The EU system covers all 27 member states of the EU and Northern Ireland, whereas the UK system is limited to England, Scotland and Wales. Although what I would say is one of the advantages of having our own system is we can have a look at the protection models in different countries around the world and take the best practices from those so we can create a model that works best for us.
Do you think there are opportunities here, Jason? Should more products be protected in this way? Should more people be applying to be recognised in this way? Should the government be making a push on these issues?
Yep, I think so. The All-Party Parliamentary Group for Geographically Protected Foods published a report last year. And one of the conclusions drawn from that report was that there's a lot of food and drink products that would be eligible for protection that aren't actually protected. And also, it's quite clear that there is quite a significant lack of recognition of what GIs actually are, and the labels aren't recognised by most of the British public, particularly compared to European counterparts. So I think here the government's got a fantastic opportunity to really engage and collaborate with consumers, producers and industry stakeholders to launch a big campaign around raising awareness of GIs, but also using it as an opportunity to promote British food and drink products and the heritage, culture and traditions that go with it.
So if I am producing a sparkling wine or a cheese, and these are particular to my locality, to my region, how should I apply for protection?
Well, it's typically, applications are typically filed by a group of producers, and it's typically done for an entity such as a cooperative or an association. In some instances, an individual can apply, but they need to satisfy certain criteria. And the application's filed before DEVRA, the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. But before applying for a GI, I would recommend seeking some legal advice just to make sure that all the potential issues are navigated through effectively.
Thank you very much, Jason Chester. And I believe that Chester is not, in this instance, a geographical indicator. Thank you very much. Well, Emily Carver is on next. First of all, may I ask you, Raab or civil service, which side are you on?
I must say I am more towards Dominic Raab in that particular debate.
Do you want to say why for a moment?
Why? Just because I do feel like the threshold for bullying is rather too low, perhaps. Although I can imagine he'd be a difficult boss. Yeah. I think that's probably fair to say. And he may have been a little rude and aggressive. That's for sure. But we're going to be getting stuck into Diane Abbott because she has had the whip suspended. That's the breaking news for comments she wrote in a letter to The Observer, essentially saying, comparing the prejudice experienced by Jewish people to that experienced by redheads. Now, as a redhead myself, I can firmly suggest that they are not the same thing, so we'll be debating that.
This is the most bizarre incident, is it not?
It's hideous.
I mean, you know, Diane must be fully aware that writing a letter like that is complete dynamite, as well as being thoroughly offensive and completely wrong. She immediately withdraws the letter, withdraws everything she said in it. Is there any plausible excuse? Can there have been some sort of malfunction in her office, or is this just crassness?
No, I don't think there is any reasonable excuse. She says she wants to disassociate herself from her remarks. Well, unfortunately, they're there in black and white for all to see, and this is very difficult for Keir Starmer. I think he probably has done the right thing in removing the whip, or the Labour chief whip has done so.
Actually, I'm not sure it is difficult for Keir Starmer. It's another opportunity for him to show that the Labour Party is changing. He's getting rid of people like this. This is another bit of old Corbynism.
But it's also a reminder.
You are here from 1 o'clock. It's going to be a great show. Thanks to all my guests this morning. Next week, we'll be celebrating the 75th anniversary of that most British of vehicles, the Land Rover. Have a good Sunday. Bye-bye.
Hello there. I'm Jonathan Vaughtry here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. Temperatures are going to be below the seasonal average for all of us over the next few days, all because we've got northerly winds that are starting to feed in some much colder air from the Arctic, spreading its way across all areas of the UK as we head into the new working week. These northerly winds have been quite strong across Scotland throughout Sunday, and we'll continue to see some gales into the evening and during the overnight period, and that will bring some snow to the higher ground areas, even sleet to lower levels as that cold air pushes in. Elsewhere, the showers we've seen throughout today will gradually clear their way off, but we'll see further rain across Northern Ireland. Underneath some of the clearer spells we do have, there is the potential for a patchy frost, particularly across areas of Scotland. Elsewhere, towns and cities around 4 to 6 degrees Celsius. Some brightness first thing, but it is going to be cloudy, particularly for Wales into southwest England as this rain moves in and the cloud building into central and southern areas of England throughout the day. Some sunnier spells developing for the northern half of the UK, still with a scattering of showers, particularly across eastern coastal areas where they could still be wintry, pushing in on quite a brisk breeze, and if you are exposed to that wind throughout the day, it will be feeling closer to freezing. Those showers inland will tend to ease off into Monday evening, still persisting across some northern coastal areas, and the cloud across the southern half of the UK will also begin to push its way off as well. Underneath some of those clearer intervals that develop, though, it is going to be quite a cold night on Monday with the risk of more of a widespread frost, so do just take care of some tender plants. But because of the clear spells that are developing, there will be a good amount of sunshine as we move into Tuesday, and it's looking to be much drier thanks to this ridge of high pressure that's built in. It's only going to be transient, though, because we've got further weather fronts and low pressure that wants to move in for the middle part of the week, so there is the risk that we see some further spells of rain towards Wednesday and Thursday, but our temperatures should slowly begin to climb up a little bit more as well. Bye-bye.
I'm Andrew Doyle.